It's really nice to have everybody. Thank you very much for showing up for this evening's event for One Dublin One Book. And then I believe the book, Dublin, Written in Our Hearts, is on sale in the bookshop. So if you want a copy of it after the event, you're more than welcome to trip in there. We also have the book in our libraries as well, so you can put your name down for it too. Just want to welcome the panel. We have Niall MacMonagle, who's a poetry editor and an art critic, and we would know him from Lifelines, the big poetry anthology that came out in the 80s. And Wind Harp was his latest anthology, which came out in 2015. And Deirdre Madden is a Wyndham Campbell Prize winner, also a Rooney Prize winner, and is a novelist who features in the anthology. One of the extracts from the anthology comes from a novel, Authenticity, which was written in around 2000 and published around 2002. So this book is actually capturing life as seen by writers and poets in the first quarter of this century. So we had Deirdre commenting on, from that time period, 20 years ago. And unfortunately, the other author who is due to be with us tonight, Niamh Campbell, who is sick, she would have been, her extract was to do with the latter part, the more recent part of this quarter of the century. And so these extracts are to do with the artist and how the artist connects with the city and reflects on it and is inspired by the city. And we have an artist here who is very much inspired by the city, who doesn't come from Dublin, comes from Austria, but has made Dublin her home. And she is an artist of some note. She has huge installations over the years, and I've been involved in one or two of them myself as a subject. Thank you. And she is also a lecturer in the National College of Art and Design as well, and that's Silvia Loeffler. So would you put your hands together and please give them all a round of applause.
Dublin can be a heaven with coffee at 11 and a stroll in Stephen's Green. It's a song not heard much nowadays, but this part of Dublin, Parnell Square, North, or Palace Row, as it was originally known, and this elegant building, Charlemont House, now the Hugh Lane Gallery, built 1762-1765, is heaven of a kind. But in November 2023, and not far from here, Dublin witnessed something very different. The vandalism, the arson, the looting, now known as the Dublin riots. An art gallery conjures up a kind of heaven. A Lewis on fire is a kind of hell. And the book we are celebrating here this evening, Dublin, Written in Our Hearts, edited by Declan Mead, captures many different Dublins, and that is its strength. At the book launch in City Hall on the 11th of March, Nigerian-Irish Fellis Speaks performed their contribution, Dublin, A Poet's View. It begins with a beautiful lyrical response to the Dublin that would become their home. It recognizes the positives, but it also has the the grit and honesty to paint a more realistic picture. In the closing lines, Fellis Speaks says, Dublin slaps many hands away. Dublin is shaking with the memory of safety now out of reach. Dublin keeps telling all of us, I have no more space. The positives and the negatives and other aspects of Dublin we will now explore in the company of writer Deirdre Madden and artist, researcher and educator Silvia Loeffler, with a particular focus on the challenges facing creatives living and working in Dublin. As Anne-Marie said, it's real pity that Niamh Campbell is unable to be with us, because that would have made for a very interesting aspect of the discussion too. Dublin, Written in Our Hearts contains the work of 22 writers, essays, poetry, novel excerpts, short stories. And Declan Mead has included an excerpt from Deirdre Madden's 2002 novel, Authenticity, and Niamh Campbell's novel, We Were Young, published in 2022. Both novels, similar and different, published 20 years apart, impressive, excellent novels, brilliantly bring Dublin to life. I was going to say both novels are dazzlingly intelligent, but that would suggest maybe a showy offness, and that is not what you find in these really remarkable novels. I would say deeply intelligent, and because Niamh Campbell is not here this evening, I just want to say behind her back that this is a terrific novel. It's funny, it's fresh, it tells of so many interesting characters, and the cover is a photograph by the Belgian photographer Harry Gruert, and it's a photograph that a character looks at in Imma, and it's interesting in that it's a photograph of three people on a rocky shore down in County Kerry during a summer, and the three people are together and apart. And that really tells us something about the relationships within this really fine book. Both Madden and Campbell, their main characters are artists. In Authenticity, Roderick Kennedy is a very talented painter, dogged by alcohol, a failed marriage, failed relationships. His partner, Julia Fitzpatrick, a much younger woman, is a more experimental artist. Cormac Mulvey, Campbell's main character, is an art photographer. He is 37, but his mother prefers to tell people he's a teacher. He has a job at DIT, and his complicated bisexual love life involves Alva, Nina, Caroline, and Senan. And I just want to read you a tiny moment from Niamh Campbell's novel. Mrs. O'Mara and Cormac's mother are talking about Patrick and Cormac, the two Mulvey sons. He did very well, Mrs. O'Mara is saying, speaking of Patrick. And then she addresses Cormac. And you, sir, she demands, is this one the Lothario? I don't even know, Joy says. Joy's the mother. He doesn't tell me anything. Nothing to tell, Cormac laughs. The chocolate biscuit in his hand is melting fast. You're still young. He is not, says Joy. So the mother has has her take on him. Place in both novels are important. We have Stephen's Green, Dalkey, the Vico Road, Christchurch, Monkstown, Dame Street, many pubs, unnamed locations in North County Dublin, and place and space are also important in artist Silvia Loeffler's work. In mapping the city, she has created beautiful images, including ones of Dún Laoghaire, Dublin Port, and inner city Dublin. And only connect. By happy chance, one of Loeffler's images contains Francis Street, where Deirdre Madden's character Julia has a flat above an antique shop. In Campbell's novel, Cormac is subletting a flat that looks out on a square of slippery paving slabs and benches in the shadow of City Hall. And set on that very street is the scene from Authenticity, chosen by Declan Mead for Dublin Written in Our Hearts. So to discuss all things Dublin and the plight of the creative individual, please welcome Silvia Loeffler and Deirdre Madden. I'd like to begin, please, by locating you in terms of your relationship with Dublin. You're from County Antrim, Deirdre, and you're from Innsbruck. You've lived here for 30 years. You've lived in France, in Italy, and you've come and gone, but you've lived here for a stretch that is 20 years, even though now you've returned to live in the north of Ireland. What was your take on Dublin when you came first, and how would you describe your relationship with this city?
While you were talking, I came here first of all just after I left school to attend Trinity College, Dublin, and I was there for 4 years while I was doing my degree in English. And I have always thought that my interest in art began when I went to live on the continent. But just when you were talking, like in hindsight, I remember I was friendly with a lady here who was much, much older than me at that stage. She lived out in Sandy Cove, and I used to visit her, and she worked in the city centre, and we used to go for lunch occasionally in the National Gallery. And I think that was really the first time. I mean, I lived in the countryside and I was reading a lot growing up, but it was only when I was with her and when I came to Dublin that I really started to look at paintings. And it took me a long time to get my head around them. And then years later, when I got married and went to live in Europe, I started looking at lots of galleries. So my relationship with Dublin started when I came here to university, but my relationship with painting, I think, also started at that time as well. I then went away after university. I was away from Dublin for a very long time, and I came back in 2004 and lived here for about 20 years then until very, very recently. So it's been a fragmented, the Dublin that I came to in the very early 80s is not the same as the Dublin I came back to in 2004, which again is not the Dublin of the 21st century. So I've lived in several Dublins over that period.
But the Dublin and the National Gallery, the art there belongs to, in many ways, it could be said, the great tradition. But your Julia Fitzpatrick character is very interested in a very different kind of art, installations, for example. So when did you become more aware of the changing nature of art? Was that in Dublin?
I think that was in Paris. I spent a lot of time in Paris, and the trajectory, my life has been good. There's been a lot of travel and moving around. And certainly you're right, it started with, I suppose, what you would call easel painting or traditional painting. It was also because as a writer, I spent some time in art colonies or residencies, where there are also painters and writers. And so you would go and chat with the painters in their studios and you'd see what they were doing. But certainly when I was living away, I became more and more interested in it as time went on. And I think I've never studied art formally. I've read a lot about it, and I think most of what I've learned about it has simply been by going to galleries and looking at things. And I remember reading that somewhere one time. Somebody said, the only thing you really have to do with art is look at it and don't be intimidated. And I think that was really good advice, because I think a lot of people can be intimidated and they think, I don't understand that, there's a pile of feathers on the floor, I don't know what that's about, and then turning hostile to it and saying, oh, it's pretentious, it means nothing, instead of just looking at it and thinking about it and coming back to it and looking at some other things. And I think that's really the way in. I think never to be afraid of literature or painting, whatever. If you don't like it, if you don't get it, maybe this particular object or text isn't for you, but there will be other ones that are. And the more you look and read and just have a think, in a way, tell yourselves that maybe there isn't that much at stake, and then you will find that actually there is a lot at stake the more you engage with it and look at it.
You mentioned Joseph Beuys in the novel. They're discussing Joseph Beuys and whether the story about his being saved is real or not. Did you come across Beuys in the Pompidou Centre?
I think I came across him in Switzerland. I spent it was about a year or so, less than a year, in Switzerland. And I think that's where I first came across his work. And Yeah, and that was possibly one of the earliest, I suppose, what you would call like conceptual artists that I maybe was very, very aware of. And so, yeah.
And Silvia, when you came here as an Erasmus student in 1995 to UCD, you came as a student of literature.
That's correct, yeah.
And were you practicing art then, or did you?
Yeah, I always dabbled, I suppose, but I was studying English and French, and that's how I'm a reader, artist reader. I have a big love for literature, but I actually started off, one of my many studies the first one was literature.
And when you came to Dublin, what were you expecting?
What was I expecting?
Well, you stayed, so...
Well, I did. I was pleasantly surprised, but I just really liked Dublin. It was 95, and the city was really exciting. I was in my early 20s, and it was a very... It went very quiet or slow pace in ways, and people took their time, really. That struck me as something I liked very much. And I also remember, actually remember going to Imma and coming here on my first visit, actually here. So, but I think that what I expected, I just let it happen to me, you know.
And in your work, you're mapping the city.
Yeah.
Would you say something about the locations that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I like swimming and the sea, and I love everything that has to do with ports. So a lot of my projects were maritime in mapping, but I love the city very much. I prefer Dublin to other cities. Even now, when you were talking about the riots, the city has changed so much. In many ways, it's a sick city, but I think Dublin is so interesting. There's no place like it in many ways, but maybe I'm saying that because I've known it for 30 years, or tried maybe to figure out how do I belong to the city. Maybe that's why all my works are around places, and in particularly because I like liquid and I like the sea. So I've been doing a lot of mapping projects with Dublin Port around that area, and Dún Laoghaire Harbour as well. But I'm back in the city, and I went to do a project with Anne-Marie, where I looked at libraries. I just mapped the places I really love, that I think are really special about the city. And that project was about the Gaeltacht Centre, about the Central Library. It'd be interesting to see, will we have a Central Library here on the big square one of the days? So I wanted to pay tribute to the Gaeltacht, because when I came in 95, I also went there, and I remember actually listening to Seamus Heaney, and I thought, this is extraordinary to see somebody walking through a shopping centre to go and give a reading in this library that is upstairs. So that was another mapping project I did then,
A character in the Niamh Campbell novel says Dublin is a very bad place to make art. Now, was that your experience?
No, I must say it wasn't at all. But then I'm thinking, because I came as a foreigner to Dublin, and in many ways Dublin was such a playground to me, because I didn't grow up here. I didn't have any, that I went to art school and I know this person, or I was related to this person, or I didn't have any of that, So I suppose I had an advantage in many ways.
And when you make a work of art, how conscious are you that this is a work that is beyond time? It's rooted in a particular time, and you, for example, your images are charting Dublin, and Dublin is changing.
Yeah.
But how conscious are you that this is a record of you involved in a city and making something that will outlive you?
Yeah, I think that I have a strange relationship with time, past and present. One of your books was very strongly resonating with me in that sense as well. I keep trying just almost to grab it or something like that. And I actually never think about, will it outlive or where will it go? That doesn't concern me really all that much, because a big turning point was maybe because I was working a lot drawing and painting on paper. I love paper. I make books, artist books. But I started painting on fabric, and most of it is see-through. And then when I choose a location, you can usually see through into the room or into the building or whatever. And that layer really interests me. It's actually not so much, of course, I am interested in what I'm doing, but it's actually interested what's behind the work.
One of your characters, William Armstrong, Deirdre, likes walking through Trinity and the rubrics and all of those buildings, because it's as if time has stood still. He doesn't want to have a sense of change and uncertainty. What about your relationship with the making of artistic people? I mean, Roderick, Julia, and William is a want-to-be artist. But when you create these artists, I mean, authenticity is the title of the novel, and William acknowledges that Julia and Roderick are authentic. What do you understand by that?
Well, I want to come back in a moment to what we were talking about, yourself and Silvia were saying about like time and place. But to answer your question first about authenticity, I think that for me, it means very much. I'll tell you, when I was looking at this work again and then reading Niamh's work, these books were written and published 20 years apart. And when I went to publish my book, I wanted to call it Authenticity, and I said to the publishers, this is the title as far as I remember, and they were happy with that. And I think now that this is very much a title of its time, and I think if you wanted to call a book Authenticity now, people would say, really? What are you talking about? What is that? You know, that it's a much more, and I think if you look, I think in Niamh's book, the art world is much more sort of fluid in terms of how the people see themselves. Their relationships amongst themselves are much more flexible and loose, and their whole sense of what they think and what they believe and who they think they are. And already it made me feel that my work was from a long time back. I don't know if you would agree with that. But for me, like, authenticity means for me like having values that have been very considered and thought through, and that you sort of know where you come from, what you're about, what you're doing. Other people can also be very authentic while holding very different views, because they're valid for them and they have thought them through and worked them out. And I suppose it's really like knowing who you are, and I think that's actually quite non-fashionable point of view nowadays to sort of say that. I think it's much that all these things about identity are much more fluid and loose. So that's, I suppose, as much as I can sensibly say about the idea of authenticity, the concept. I was very interested in what Silvia was saying, and also very, very interested in your work, Silvia, because time. You were asking her about thinking about. Will the work last, I think, or how do you see it existing in time? And like time is one of the great themes of literature, but I think it's also very much related to place. And this idea of how time and place interact, it's something that Proust has written about really, really beautifully. You can have, you have this room, But if you look at it, like if you had been here in the 18th century, or if you'd been here 2 weeks ago, if you came tomorrow, like it's constantly changing, and the sort of magic of the moment will disappear as soon as everybody leaves and time moves on. And yet the place can remain, like the plasterwork has been here for hundreds of years. So I think that, as I said, it's almost like a magical thing, that relationship between place and time, and I think that's very important in art. And I think the relationship of time generally is a really key thing, and to sort of consider. As I said, it's one of the great themes of literature, and it's one of the things I really loved in Silvia's work about looking at Dublin Port sort of through the years and then making this artwork that you can literally see through back, of the various layers of time. I thought that was a really brilliant idea. So
maybe we'd now hear a short extract from your contribution to the Dublin Written in Our Hearts book. And I asked Declan Mead why he chose this particular passage. I mean, the opening chapter of Authenticity is tension-filled, it's very arresting. It's a man in meltdown in St. Stephen's Green, and this character Julia comes upon him and is very kind and helpful to him. But Declan said he chose the passage that ended up in the anthology because it is people moving through the city. And of course, the great mover through Dublin city is Leopold Bloom. So walking a city. So if you would please just read that short extract. This is William seeing Roderick and Julia in the street.
William left the train at Westland Row, crossed the road and went through the back gate into Trinity College. He was aware as he emerged onto College Green that he was tracing out now a skewed version of his past life. Empty-handed and casually dressed, he dawdled along the exact same route where, not so long ago, he had strode among the early morning crowds with business suits and briefcase, purposeful and directed and desperate. What had changed in his life? But really changed. His mind shrank from the thought. Julia. He would go to see Julia, he decided, as he proceeded up Dame Street. He knew enough now about the pattern of her day to know that there was a good chance of finding her at home at this time. And then, just at that moment, he saw her on the other side of the road. She was walking in the same direction as William. Evidently, she was on her way back to her house. He would have crossed over, called her name and joined her, had she not been with Roderick. He trailed in their wake, hoping that her companion would leave her at some stage, but that too, he knew, was unlikely. Logic said that he was going home, or worse, from William's point of view, was on his way to Julia's place. The sleeves of the blouse Julia was wearing hung down well past her knuckles, completely concealing her hands. From the depths of the left sleeve dangled a bag made of such thin white plastic that William could see through it and identify the modest haul of groceries it contained. A carton of milk, a loaf, some oranges, a tin of soup and a tin of cat food. Abruptly, Roderick and Julia stopped walking, and William stopped too, thereby causing a collision between himself and a woman walking immediately behind him, much to her irritation. Julia handed the plastic bag to Roderick and held onto his left forearm for balance while she stood on one leg and removed her shoe, a scuffed brown moccasin, then shook it to remove a pebble. As she did so, Roderick said something that made them both laugh. Julia so much that she wobbled and almost overbalanced. Dropping the shoe on the pavement, she shoved her foot back into it and playfully thumped him on the shoulder in response to whatever his teasing remark had been. Herself said something, and again they both laughed. Roderick was still holding her shopping, and by his gesture, William understood that he was offering to carry it for her, but Julia shook her head. She handed it back, and they continued on their way. It never occurred to William how disconcerted they both would have been had they known that he was observing their inconsequential, but, as they thought, private stroll through the city.
Thank you very much. It's often said, no problem, no story. And the problem here is William falling in love with Julia, and he's given his life to a job that is the law, and he's deeply unhappy. As a writer and as an artist, Silvia, do you think the price is too high? T.S. Eliot said at the end of his life, the price was too high, being a creative, because you're always giving. You write books, you make art, and you want it to be acknowledged, you want the books to be read, you want the art to be understood and appreciated. But it's a life of great uncertainty, unease, or is it?
Do you want to answer this? I think that for some people the price is very, very high. I was really struck by, it was so interesting to hear now why you call it authenticity. I was saying to Deirdre, I didn't like any of these creepy old men artists in her novel who are painters. And but then I kind of came down from the high horse a bit because I couldn't understand the struggles, in particular of Roderick in so many ways, to be somebody to understand him as a person that is also his art. In Niamh's book, where the main character is, as you said, an art photographer, but he's a lecturer in DIT. Niamh doesn't know this, but I worked in DIT, and I think I know Cormac. So, in many ways, we don't know all that much about what kind of work he makes very often. We know a little bit, but we do not know.
Well, we do know earlier on that he took those plastic Virgin Mary bottles and melted them down to become a lamp. You know, and in Kilmainham, going home one evening, he found bits and things of the street that he turned into an art object.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we do know, and every time she talks about the work, I'm often thinking, let us know a little bit more about what he's actually doing. There's one piece he'd done as a young man when he went to art school, and it was called was it called The Father of My Children? It was about his own dad. It was about his mother, and he did it in art school. And in the novel, somebody was making a comment. I really liked this work when you didn't sell yourself out just yet, when you were trying to please the art world with your photographs. And to come back to this, and this made me think a lot about when I read authenticity. What is the price to be a known artist? You know, because there's so many people who are artists that will never be shown, or they won't be in a gallery space. But is the price to be then in the public eye, to make a living from that? Is it worse than any other occupation? I don't know. I really don't know.
But as Deirdre did say about the people, the artists in We Were Young, it's very uncertain. It's very...
it's a gig economy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It ends with a woman down in Ballinskelligs determined to make the most of the residency and get to painting. But these people, they're very uncertain in their relationships. They do drugs. There are no drugs in authenticity. There's just booze. But we've now moved on, and there's a drug culture in the Niamh Campbell novel. So it's a very, very uncertain world, the world that she describes. But let's do something very certain, and let's look at some beautiful images. So Silvia, would you just put up on that screen and talk us through some of the images you've created, please?
So I just chose some images that respond to the city. I just maybe want to start off with this because Anne-Marie Kelly is here. This was a work that we look at, we think it's Dublin, but it's not correct. Dublin not correct in many ways. It's a river, the Liffey, but everything is concentrated on the north side. I was quite intrigued by movement through the city, and particularly like your artists, Deirdre, they go up Francis Street in 2002, a street that is now completely and utterly changed, will we call it gentrified. When I was doing the project for the Gaeltacht Centre for the Central Library, I was really interested in looking at how people experience the North Inner City. And I think that's why I quite like this image, because then it was chosen for the metropoles, and it was called City Routes. And I just tried to splash a lot to create that sort of movement of routes that take us from one side to the other over the river. The image was shown it was the pandemic, so it was 2021, but it was shown in bus shelters as well and on billboards. And I chose it because one of the photographer lecturer in DIT sent it to me on a billboard. And that's why I thought it was quite appropriate to look at the city in that sense. Coming back to this type of movement and how to maybe go back to time and space, what you were saying there before, this one is a work that is from, I think it was about 9 maps. It's contemporary, it's accurate, whereas the other one wasn't accurate. But it just, coming back to this, how accurate is a map, really? And it's the port leading us up to the city, and you can see the River Liffey flowing. But it is, I painted it, I reprinted it digitally. But I put a thread in, and it was like, again, thinking about this, how do we know who we are, and how do we move about in the city? It's like a Greek kind of way of how do we find our ways out of the labyrinth, and where does it lead us? Like, you know, and this was about, this map is from 2016. So I was thinking about transformation, and how do we cope with transformation? Where does it leave us again? How do we orientate ourselves, I suppose? Like, you know, so that's in terms of how I approach the city with a lot of my mappings. In the reference then to your work, Deirdre, I chose this one. It's just called Map Fragment. But it was the first time I drew on fabric and I printed on it, and I had this feeling of I have found something that I'd never done before. I was being authentic to myself. So that's why this one. And I chose this one then because this is the labyrinth. It is actually based on a Greek labyrinth. But there is a naughty old lady in there with her pussycat, and she is a diviner. It's just called diviner, and she knows her way through the city. It was 2007 when I did this, and then I started doing a PhD about walking the city and how a woman walks the city. And I was going to do it about monuments, but I was actually then interested in how they were defaced, and I was looking at bad graffiti, and I decided to make the bad graffiti the monument. Coming back to Cormac in Niamh's book, who is the photographer, this is my only work, and I don't really show it because it's very bad, but this is my only work that has photographs in it, in the labyrinth. And when I was looking at the bad graffiti, I was still looking at some monuments, I was looking at shop fronts, and it was all the locations I went to, and I put them in as blind spots in the city. And I'm thinking that Cormac and myself have met in many of these locations throughout this time period that Niamh is talking about in her work. So that's the few images just
And
to relate.
what size are these works, Silvia?
This one here is about, it's about
and
photographs are like cards.
Your medium is paint on cloth?
This one is just on paper.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
These are all paper works, except for the one that I have shown that was authentic. That's all on fabric.
What's your favourite part of Dublin, Silvia? You don't have to say the Hugh Lane.
There's several streets I really love in Dublin, and they've changed. I used to love Sing Street. I used to love Talbot Street very much. I love the Liffey. I love the Boardwalk. And I really, really, really love the Spire.
And for you, Deirdre? The city you've now left?
I really like some of the squares. I think around by Fitzwilliam Square is beautiful. During the pandemic, when you could only sort of walk quite near where you lived, I do like Portobello very, very much, the whole history and the canal and whatever. But I think around by Fitzwilliam Square, Marion Square, a lot of that is very, very beautiful. Yeah, I think wandering around there.
In the book, there are three wonderful pieces, different but related in that they all involve walking. Eggshells by Katrina Lally. It's a laugh out loud extract. The novel itself is wonderful, but this very strange, interesting, imaginative woman walks Dublin, and she has a mind like no other. Then you've got Carl Whitney's account, a prose piece, walking through the Liberties. And then you have the Peter Sir essay on the monuments. And he looks at the monuments right down through O'Connell Street. And he looks at the Julian Opie outside here, that elegant woman walking forever into eternity. And how the others must be envious because they're all static. And she is always in perpetual in motion.
Yes.
I want to ask you a question, Deirdre. It has nothing to do with being creative in the sense of the artist in the city, and I was going to ask Niamh as well. It's well known that Jane Austen, nowhere in her novel, has a scene with men just on their own. You write brilliantly about Roderick and Dennis, and Niamh writes about Cormac and Patrick. And you write so well about men. Jane Austen always has a woman present. Was it a challenge for you to sit down and write a scene where no woman was present? You were the woman creating the scene, but no woman was there listening, as it were.
No, I don't think I thought about, I didn't worry about that. I think.
And is it because we've just come a long way from Jane Austen?
Possibly.
I mean, George Eliot will have it. You know, she'll include a scene with two men speaking. But isn't it odd that Jane Austen nowhere? She'll tell us about George and John Knightley having a conversation, but it's off the page. They're down in Donwell Abbey. But they don't have she doesn't have a scene before the reader. Two men on their own, no woman present.
Yes. I don't, maybe, I'm going to say something really cheeky. Maybe she didn't like men. I think her work was very, very feminine. And I know there's romance in her work, and Mr. Darcy and whatever. But I think she was somebody like her sister was very important to her. I mean, it's conceivable that her world was so feminine. And I also feel that the world that she was in was so completely gendered, if I could put it that way. There were women and there were men, and there were, they lived and dressed and everything. Even if you look at 19th century photographs or paintings, you can see how different it was. And I think even by George Eliot's time, even by Charlotte Bronte's time, there was possibly a bit more connection. But I think maybe at that particular time, now that could be I would have to say I haven't considered this.
There's an essay in it. I look forward to reading your essay.
You might have to wait a long time.
Silvia, the woman artist, the man artist. If you go into a gallery, should you be able to tell the difference?
I'm actually not so concerned about that. I really want to compliment Deirdre on these relationships between the two brothers, and I felt that it was very insightful. I think that I'm really interested in how women walk the city, because we don't know all that much traditionally. Public women were the prostitutes, and people who were male, they were the flaneur and the dandy and the man about town. So I think that's why I feel like, especially in terms of street walking, I'm really interested in women's experiences. In the gallery, I never even thought about, I never even thought about what gender it would be, what people would go and see.
Time is hugely important in authenticity. It's not chronological time, because you return to, through memory, you give us a past, a backstory again and again. So you deepen the narrative in that way. How difficult was that? Did you have a lot of, I think it's your longest book.
Yes, I just want to say something that's been floating around my mind for the past few moments, especially when Silvia was talking about her work, and it's almost like a technical point. I think that as a writer, time and place can really serve you technically, because you have sort of the idea of characters, and they're sort of floating about and they're doing lots of things all over the place over a very long time frame. But when you're going to write it, you have to really decide, when is this happening? When does it begin? When does it end? Now, you can play around with the time frame within that, but when writing doesn't work, it's very often that there's something amiss with how you're communicating the time frame, or even where characters are. That when people are starting to write, or they're not very, they haven't really got to grips with it, it can all sort of free float, and you don't know, people sort of appear and whatever, and it's because you haven't told. You have to sort of tell readers things. And when I was teaching creative writing, I often used to say, don't be afraid to say, on Monday morning, and then tell us what happened 2 days later, whatever, the following week, because readers actually like that, and because they won't even notice it. They'll just know where they are. They won't be sitting thinking, was this before that, or does this come after that, and where are we now? And so these very sort of micro-coded signals of this is happening now, this is happening here, and you seed that with little signals. And I think that's a technical point about writing that sometimes when people are starting out, they can actually struggle with a lot. And once you point it out, it's dead easy. As I say, you just tell the reader, it's Tuesday morning, and, that afternoon, on the next day, and a week later, and relate it in that way, and always be clear, of where you are.
In relation to your work, Silvia, Brian Maguire, whose work is on show at this gallery and is a wonderful, wonderful exhibition, Brian Maguire says a painting has hand and time. When you make a work, you make it with your hand, with your imagination. And what about time? Does the finished work match what you began to conceive as that work of art?
No, it doesn't.
So how do you cope with that process, or how do you manage?
I embrace it.
Pardon?
I embrace it. I think that we're too obsessed with the end and the finish. I really think that you just go as far as you can go.
And when do you know to stop?
When I know.
I presume the answer is it's got the integrity and the authenticity of the work.
Well, often I think that I just remember I had a studio with a young man, and he said to me, "Your work, they always look so unfinished."
Can I say, I think Silvia's drawing attention to a really interesting idea, whether it be about writing or painting or making visual art. And it's the distinction between the process and the product. It's the activity of it, what you're actually doing, and then the sort of, shall we say, the completed thing, or what you're with. You're making something, and it's why I always feel that writing is I never see writing as an intellectual activity. I always see it much more as an artisan activity. I always say it's like making a basket or making a pot or something like that, because you're trying to make a text, or and you're going to keep at it and work at it until you've got this thing that is then independent of you. It's you can put it out there. It has its own life, be it as a text or a basket or a painting or a piece of cloth or whatever it is that you're actually making. And you can struggle with the process. You can struggle so much that you have to give up on the thing and just set it aside. Or, and it's that balance between not being so hung up on one or the other. You can sort of kill the object by being too intense and over-controlling with the process.
I couldn't agree more. And you actually, even though these characters are far back from 20 years, you capture the essence. It was a real privilege to read it,
Thank you.
We have time for some questions from the floor. A question here.
Thank you very much. Over the last couple of decades, I imagine, and that will have brought you into contact with a lot of young writers, young artists. Now, Deirdre gives a very strong sense of how precarious life as a young artist is in the person of Julia in 2002. But I just wondered, what's your sense of that for the people you've taught very recently? Has it got more precarious or less? Are there more supports? Like, what is Dublin like now for that up-and-coming generation of young artists?
It's very sad, because it's really hard for people to find a place to live, and I think that when I started off in Dublin 30 years ago, I thought at the time it wasn't so easy to find a studio, or it wasn't easy to find a place to live, but it's now almost impossible for people unless they have a lot of money. So people who go to art college now, I have to say, they still amaze me. It's amazing that they make art, because there's such a survival issue that is attached to it now, that I don't know if I would see the city as this great thing that I saw it in 1995 if I was that age, like, you know, so I think that is a huge problem.
I always wait for the mic. I'm a very well-trained questioner, but not a well-trained answerer. No, by the way, I mixed up Deirdre in my notes and Silvia, so I'll have to go back later and change everything around. No, I've never read Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy, I think, but I believe it was groundbreaking in that he did text and also artistic work, diagrams, whatever. I would love to see much less of this distinction between the world of art and writing. I would love to see, take me back to Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables. I'd love to see serious, well, children's literature is serious, of course, but I'd love to see people like yourselves, if I could just make a suggestion very humbly, joining art and text, even in collaboration, the two of you, like getting together and doing something together, or even a writer doing the art, or vice versa. Has that been done by many people, or would publishers sort of run away from it? Just some interesting points, I hope.
It has been done with poetry, poets and artists, Barry Cook and Seamus Heaney, John Montague and Louis Le Brocq. But it's a difficult challenge because how do you set the thing in motion? Do you begin the novel or, for example, the poem and then have the artist come on board?
Well, a strange thing is even in the 19th century, it was absolutely standard that there would be illustrations in books, I think, for adults. So there was, like, if you think of Dickens, there are all the illustrations from that time. And now you almost never see illustrations in books unless they're for children. And that's a sort of strange thing, because I do think, I think that illustrations can really enrich a text, and sometimes they can become so much a part of the text that you can't really say. Like Dickens, again, is a case in point. But I think what you're talking about is more like an artist, like maybe marrying the text and the image together. I think people have done that, and obviously as well there's like responses, like Paul Durkin.
The Paul Durkin, the ekphrastic poems, but
yes.
the art was there first.
Yes.
I think the suggestion is the two work together.
Yes. I'm sure there are, just off the top of my head, I can't think of examples, but I know that writers and artists have worked together. I think Paul Muldoon might have done some work like that.
Paul Muldoon has done everything.
Has done it. Except maybe paint.
One final question. Sorry.
Given that we're in a very challenging world at the moment, I just wonder, in terms of your art and your writing, do you ever worry that things might change? I mean, we're looking at this art, but I'm thinking in certain parts of the world that could be interpreted as you being critical of something or another. So in terms of the contemporary world we live in, does that cross your mind of just how vulnerable artists and writers are?
Well, I don't think that they're more vulnerable than anybody else, to be honest with you. I think that again, I don't know how we define art. This is, I suppose, the question. But I think a lot of artists work so much with communities. They work so participatory that there is an engagement of artists to open up a portal, maybe, that somebody who comes from politics or business or science cannot necessarily do so fluidly, maybe. That's how I see it. I am thinking that artists are vulnerable, being exploited constantly by academia, not by writers, I don't think. But I think that there is always somebody like a token artist, you know, oh, let's bring the artist in and they'll do it for us. But again, then how do we put value, how do we judge, you know, and how do we see value of something that is being created? And coming back to time maybe and place, it's a luxury to be an artist that is employed, that gets a commission, that works in education. But then again, does it do away with the authenticity is the question. So,
I think it's a very political thing to be making art and to be writing nowadays, given the way the world is. And you know, you said maybe about things changing. Things are constantly changing, and at the moment, I think things are changing with dizzying speed. And to try and react to that, or process that, or express that, to try and challenge some of the things that are happening in the world, I think that all of that is possible, but it's not the only way of reacting to the world. I mean, I even think like things like beauty are still very important, because so much of what is happening in the world is so ugly, and in every sense, like not just visually but morally ugly, and to try and create something to set against that is also important and beautiful. So I think it's still really, really valid and more important than ever to write and to make art and to fight back against all of this. I'm not saying in a very simplistic way of just sort of writing things politically against it. It's much broader than that, but I just think it has immense value. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Silvia about her mapping projects, because I know you had kind of gathered the experiences and the travels through the city of many other people as part of those projects. And I was wondering how those other lives, how those other journeys through the city had shaped how you thought of the city and understood the city.
It has been a lovely thing for me to record people's city routes, and Anne-Marie's going, oh, I had to do one too. But it makes me understand people's sense of belonging to place, and through their understanding, I maybe understand myself a little bit better. So it's like the spider doing the web and the web doing the spider. And I think that, and maybe this comes to your question back to how do we interact with one another. Everybody's so vulnerable, and I think just in ways of we have to come together and exchange, or at least people coming back to this the final product and the process is about dialogue, really, coming together and exchanging views about the city, how we feel, what does home mean to us, like, really, and who do we actually hear about, who they say they're home here or not. Yeah.
And on that note, a hopeful note, I think, and you mentioned the need for beauty. The epilogue to authenticity brings us to a glorious closing moment. Julia has a lovely relationship with her father, Dan. Her mother has died a long while ago. But they're looking out on the orchard and the apples, the few remaining apples on the tree. And Julia says, I suppose we should have gathered them all in, she said, the apples. Dan came over and stood beside her, gazed out into the orchard. Oh, there'll always be apples, Julia, Dan said, when we're all of us gone. And when we're all of us gone, we will have the books and we will have the art. Thank you very much for coming.